I'm Ellen Besner of the CJN Daily, sponsored by Metropia. A couple of weeks ago, we did a story about the Adam Sandler film that was being shot in and around Toronto, based on the book You Are So Not Invited to My Bat Mitzvah. And we also did an interview earlier with an 80-year-old Montreal woman who celebrated her first bat mitzvah. There's been a lot of publicity this year about bar mitzvahs because it's the 100th anniversary of the very first one held in North America. That one was in 1922 in New York. The first ever bat mitzvah in Canada was held in 1949 in Ottawa. And the girl who had it is my aunt, Miriam Lieff. So I'm away from the office for the rest of this week, but we're bringing you this encore presentation from earlier in the spring about the first Canadian bat mitzvahs and one of the newest. I'll be back with a full slate of brand new shows on Monday, August 22nd.
Ko Amar Adonai Savot Elohei Israel.
That's 12-year-old Naomi Hochman of Winnipeg, practicing chanting her Haftorah. Her bat mitzvah is coming up on March the 19th. The day school student is busy putting the final touches on her speech for her big day at Shaarey Zedek Synagogue. Hochman is the first girl in her family to have a bat mitzvah. Her older brothers had bar mitzvahs, and she just took it for granted she was going to have one too. Her ceremony, though, comes on the same weekend as the 100th anniversary of the first bat mitzvah ever held in North America. It was 1922, and it was Judith Kaplan, the daughter of an American reconstructionist rabbi, who was the first girl to have one. Bat mitzvahs, as we know them today, didn't really start in Canada until many decades later, in 1949, and it was Miriam Lieff of Ottawa. She was the daughter of a synagogue president, and she became the first Canadian girl to have a bat mitzvah. Lieff paved the way for generations of girls to take a more egalitarian role in Jewish religious life in this country.
I knew it was the first in my synagogue, the first in Ottawa, and probably the first in the conservative movement for many miles around us. But I didn't know it was the first in Canada at the time. I only knew that my father was working very hard to establish this. And he was a pioneer.
There are formal photos showing Miriam Lieff in her bat mitzvah dress posing with her family in 1949 in a series of books called Gathering Rosebuds. The author of that series was Miriam's father, the late Mr. Justice Abraham Lieff. He was my grandfather, and Miriam is my aunt. Isn't that cool? And I only discovered she was a Canadian pioneer for bat mitzvahs thanks to a historian in Montreal, Hannah Sroor, who suggested that we put together an episode to mark the 100th anniversary of the first bat mitzvah in North America. So coming up, 86-year-old Miriam Lieff and 12-year-old Naomi Hochman will be here to share their experiences as Benot Mitzvah. And joining us now from Winnipeg are Naomi Hochman, and from Florida, Miriam Lieff, and we're also joined by Miriam's younger sister, Lois Lieff. She's 84, and she's my mom, and she was supposed to be the second girl in Ottawa to have a bat mitzvah. From what we know, and maybe you know, Miriam, you were the first girl in Canada to have a bat mitzvah. Would you tell us about the date, the time, and, did you know that you were the first one?
I knew that I was the first one in our city. I knew I was the first one in the conservative movement in our city because my father founded the synagogue. And my bat mitzvah was in conjunction with an opening of a new building for Agudath Israel. It was their second home in Ottawa. We had just hired a new rabbi, Rabbi Margolis. I didn't even know him really. And it was in March of 1949. I was almost 14 because by the time the synagogue was opened, my father wanted to coordinate, so I was past my 13th birthday.
Did you want a bat mitzvah, Miriam?
I didn't even know what it was. I was quite well educated. I wasn't in any way afraid of what I was going to do. I complied, my father wanted me to do it, and for his synagogue, which was very important to him. And I did it. And how did I feel? I when all the kids were sitting in the back row looking at me in my long white dress, I was totally embarrassed. I thought they were looking at me like I was some queer person doing this. But after, at the reception, they told me how amazing they thought that the whole thing was. And then I felt a lot better. I did the whole Friday night service plus a sermon.
And I'm going to let Lois talk about hers. You were supposed to be the second in Ottawa.
Mine was April the 6th, 1951. It was Shabbat HaChodesh. The second one was Dorothy Wexler, now Dorothy Tonchen. I think my father felt that if it was going to be Miriam and then me, it might be the two Lieff sisters and over and out. And he really wanted to establish this as a feature of Agudath Israel. The Wexlers had just moved from Montreal. Debbie was a Hebrew speaker. She was younger than I, but so she was the second. I believe hers was sometime in 1950. And I didn't wear a long white dress. I wore a pink dress and a pink hat, as I remember. And I followed the same procedure as Miriam, the Kabbalat Shabbat, Kiddush, and a sermon.
You also had to wait until you were not.
I was
12.
also almost 14, yes.
But now we're going to turn to Naomi. Tell us your date. Tell us how you decided. Did you want a bat mitzvah? And how did it all come about?
So my date is March 19th. So coming up pretty soon, 2 weeks from now. And yeah, I really wanted one. My brothers both had one. So I always knew I wanted one because I remember my brothers having a lot of fun and like having family members come out from out of town. And it was just a really exciting time, you know.
You're doing a bit differently than Miriam and Lois were able to do. Tell us what your whole, synagogue involvement is.
So I have the Saturday morning service and I get to do my half Torah. I do Torah portions, blessings, the whole service basically.
What about in your school? How is it now? You go to Jewish school in Winnipeg, right? Are there lots of girls having bat mitzvahs and your friends and peers? Is something normal there?
Yeah, it's really normal. Actually, the week before my bat mitzvah, one of my best friends is having hers. And there are loads of girls in my grade and the grades above me that are having. So it's really common. It's as common as a guy having a bar mitzvah.
Well, turn back to Miriam. You said that when you were standing up there in your dress doing your bat mitzvah, it was a Friday night, just to make sure. Girls weren't allowed to do Saturday at that time. Was that ever a question of doing Saturday, or no? It wasn't.
I couldn't have an aliyah, and I don't think women were on the bimah even. So this was totally foreign, and they thought they would try a Friday night because it would be acceptable.
Yeah. As far as I know, the first Shabbat morning bat mitzvah in Canada was Donnie Becker, as she was then, Donnie Frank, whose father, Rabbi Levi Becker, had just started the first reconstructionist congregation in Montreal. And she did have an aliyah, and she did chant the Haftorah. That was, I think, about 1953.
Mm-hmm. So Miriam and Lois, having a bat mitzvah, how did it shape you as the Jewish woman that you are today?
Well, I loved Hebrew school. We had a teacher named Jacob Gordon. Even though it was after school, it was twice a week and on Sunday, and learned well. I think that perhaps in my class, Elaine Sloan and I knew more about the history and the language than any of the boys. We were quite good. So I went to synagogue with him every Shabbat for 7 years. I got a prize. So I think my shaping me started way back before the bat mitzvah. And my grandchildren, my children and my grandchildren, they follow Judaism very closely to this day.
And Lois, tell us a bit about you, how it shaped you and your Judaism as a Jewish woman being a bat mitzvah.
I think it was part of the path of my whole life, my upbringing, just as Miriam intimated in hers, which has continued. My children did have, but we were Ellen and Brenda both became bat mitzvah.
Now you are a lot different than the two pioneers who had theirs, because you were having a pandemic-ish bat mitzvah.
Yeah.
Was yours even delayed because of the social distancing. Can you talk a bit about the challenges?
Well, I was actually going to have mine in Israel and last year, but COVID hit right before I was going to start my classes, and the rabbi just completely cut off new classes, so I wasn't able to do that. And we couldn't travel, so we didn't go to Israel. But hopefully after my bat mitzvah, we'll get to go there.
Lois and Miriam, did you guys have a party, with the DJ and, the whole photo booths like normally people have? What was your celebrations like? First, Lois and Miriam.
It was the Friday night. There was a dessert kiddush after the service, and that was it. I didn't have a party.
Miriam, what did you do for yours?
It was an oneg, and I would say it was a pretty lavish oneg. There was a lot of pastries. It was tea, coffee, and our friends were there too. I don't even know if we got presents. Did we get presents, Snooky? I don't even know.
Yes.
And are you going to be wearing a talit, Naomi?
I am. I'm using my mom's talit, but after my bat mitzvah, my mom is going to make a talit for me.
And Lois and Miriam, do you have questions for Naomi?
I think, Naomi, that both my sister and I would love to have been doing what you're doing, because as we've gone through our life path, we've done this many times. My father was at my 65th birthday while I had an aliyah and did a haftorah also. I've done them in Palm Beach. I've done, we like to do it.
That's awesome.
I did one in Boca about 2 weeks ago. On Zoom. There were some people in shul and some people in their condos or at home, and but it's quite normal. But Dad was pushing for, towards the inclusion of women in all facets of synagogue life, and not just in a secondary role.
Beautifully done. So here's what I think we should do. I think you should invite us three to come by Zoom. We would be honored to come to your bat mitzvah. I know that sounds schnorry, but it didn't mean it that way, because I think that it would be so honored to have that opportunity to see you shine after we've met you. And I hope you'll consider on live TV saying yes.
Absolutely. I would love to do that.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That'll be great.
Of course. Mm-hmm.
And that's what Jewish Canada sounds like for this episode of the CJN Daily, sponsored by Metropia. Integrity, community, quality, and customer care. We want to send a hearty shout out and mazel tov to Naomi Hochman and to her family for their upcoming simcha. And I just want to say I still remember how to chant the opening sentence of my bat mitzvah haftorah. Actually, my sister and I both had Saturday morning bat mitzvahs. I wasn't allowed to have my own aliyah, though. My father had to do the aliyah for me. I don't remember much about the bat mitzvah because I was sick as a dog. I had 103 fever from tonsillitis.